Zoyowa Lavatongue is by and far one of my favorite commanders from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Something about that cute little goblin face is just so inspiring, and considering I pulled literally a full playset from the little fella from 2 bundles worth of boosters, I think I need to build a deck for each one. As a quick refresher, Zoyowa is a 2/2 for 2 mana that's broken down to 1 each of black and red with Death Touch. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent might either discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyowa deals 3 damage to each opponent who did neither. Descending is a pretty simple mechanic. If a permanent card enters your graveyard from anywhere, be it an exiled, milled from the deck, sent from the battlefield to the graveyard, and so on, you have descended. So this deck is going to utilize the descend mechanic in a slightly different way. I've been working on a deck that will be utilizing a kindred theme of goblins with some sacrifice to get Zoyowa's ability to trigger, along with a spicy little bit of tech that we'll discuss much later on. Starting off, let's go over some of our lovely little goblins. Battlecry Goblin has an activated ability that lets us sink 2 mana to give each of our goblins +1/+0 and haste. If it attacks, if we've attacked with creatures with total power 6 or more, we also create a 1/1 goblin that's also tapped and attacking. Enterprising Scallywag gives us a treasure token at each of our end steps so long as we've descended that turn. This is excellent value, though keep in mind that tokens being sacrificed, like goblins and treasure tokens, will not trigger the descend mechanic because they are not permanent cards. Goblin Matron is our goblin demonic tutor, letting us tutor any goblin we need from our deck straight to our hand. Goblin Rabblemaster gives us quite a lot of value for our goblins, and while it doesn't quite make us into an aggro deck, it benefits us taking a more aggressive approach to our game. This makes our goblins have to attack, but we also get a 1/1 goblin with haste each turn, and whenever the Goblin Rabblemaster attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each other attacking goblin. Grenzo Dungeon Warden is a goblin. He enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on him based on whatever you pay for X, and then we can pay 2 mana to send the bottom card of our library to the graveyard. If that's a creature card, we can put it straight onto the battlefield. This is pretty slick, as it being a creature will both trigger the descend and it'll enter the battlefield. Even though the creature leaves the graveyard as it enters the battlefield, it will have been in the graveyard if only briefly. Gut True Soul Zealot has an attract trigger, letting us sacrifice another creature or artifact to give us a 4/1 skeleton creature token with menace that's tapped and attacking. This gives us extra value and extra punching ability. This can also be used to trigger the descend so long as we sacrifice a non-token creature or artifact. Krenko Mob Boss is here, as it definitely would not be able to be a goblin deck without the card to dump hordes of goblins onto the battlefield. Just remember, these do not trigger the descend. I am actually borrowing a note from the Pauper Goblins list for this deck, using the combo of Putrid Goblin, Skirk Prospector, and the First Day of Class, which could result in an infinite red mana combo. The way that it works is that you cast First Day of Class, which makes it so every creature after it will enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it and haste. Putrid Goblin has Persist, which lets it return from dying with a -1/-1 counter on it as long as it did not have one on it before. But because it gets the +1/+1 counter from the First Day of Class, the 2 counters will cancel each other out, letting the Putrid Goblin exist on the battlefield without any counters on it each time it dies. We then sacrifice it infinitely to the Skirk Prospector for 1 red mana each time. This will give us as much red mana as we could possibly want. Sensation Gorger is a funny looking goblin who has kinship. At the beginning of our upkeep, we can look at the top card of our library. If it's either a goblin or a shaman, we can reveal it, and then each player discards their hand and draws 4 cards. This can be great to help trigger the descent, as it's likely something in our hand will be a permanent. It's also a great way to help churn through our library and start getting to where we need to be. Squee Goblin Nabob is here as a recurable discard or sack piece. We can return him each upkeep from our graveyard to our hand, and then reuse him for whatever resource we need him for. Stalactite Stalker is here as well as our descend relevant removal piece. This does also get around the indestructible creatures as well, and it can be especially helpful when we get him large enough before sacrificing him. Treasure Nabber is largely here to steal mana rocks from opponents, which can be very helpful to let us ramp excessively. We can then, of course, sacrifice those artifacts should we have a means to do so, but if the card that we sacrifice is owned by an opponent, it hitting the graveyard will not trigger our descend. Wart Boggart Auntie is a 3/3 with Fear. At the beginning of our upkeep, we can return a target goblin card from our graveyard to our hand. This is great recursion and can help us recover from any removal that our opponents throw at us, or any excessive discarding or sacrifice that we do to our poor little gobbos. Now, do you remember that infinite combo that we discussed earlier? There is a point to that existing in the deck, and while it is a little convoluted, Street Urchin provides us a route to a win condition under the right circumstances. Street Urchin is a 2-mana enchantment background that gives our commander the ability to pay 1 and sacrifice another creature or artifact to ping a target for 1 damage. This has so many applications with Zoyowa. Our little buddy has Death Touch, and so pinging any creature for 1 damage will kill it instantly, letting us effectively have creature removal on our commander. If we have infinite mana from the aforementioned combo, we can pivot over to sacrificing the Putrid Goblin and paying 1 red as many times as it takes to kill the table. To help us bolster up that mana, I've also included Braid of Fire. This enchantment has a cumulative upkeep of adding 1 red mana to your mana pool. This mana only exists during your upkeep step, and so once your draw step begins, that mana will go away, meaning you must use the mana during your upkeep step only. Street Urchin is largely the sink that I'm going to be using this for, so long as you have creatures or artifacts to sacrifice. Now, for those of you who never saw this card before and might be thinking it's a little strange, at the time when this first came out, we had a mechanic in the game called Mana Burn, where unspent mana would deal 1 damage to you for each mana lost between phases and turns. It has since been removed from the game, but that was the balancing factor that we had in place for Braid of Fire at the time. We also have Black Market to help boost up our black mana production. Given that we will be doing a lot more creature sacrifice in this iteration of the deck, this will give us a lot more black mana. But beyond that, I've included quite a bit of treasure production in the deck. They won't trigger the Descend, but they do obviously retain a lot of value. Gorbag of Minas Morgul has a trigger whenever a goblin or orc deals combat damage to a player, we can sacrifice that creature and either draw a card or create a treasure token. This can easily trigger our Descend, and both outcomes are pure gas. Mahadi Emporium Master gives us a treasure for each creature that died this turn, which also includes our opponent's creatures and works very nicely with that infinite mana combo. Pitiless Plunderer is here, of course, as perhaps the best treasure producing aristocrat in the game. This, again, also synergizes very nicely with that infinite combo from earlier, as we'll net a treasure for each sacrifice. Descent into Avernus is a cute little tech that I thought I'd give a try. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put 2 Descend counters onto this card, and then each player creates X treasure tokens and takes X damage, where X is the number of Descend counters on it. This will scale up pretty quickly and could eventually morph into a win con on its own, though an opponent will likely want to remove it long before it gets to that point. So far this deck doesn't seem to do a whole lot with our little buddy Zoyowa, right? Well, his ability will be going off each turn that we descend, and so opponents will slowly lose their resources to prevent him from dealing 3 damage. This deck is taking a bit more of a passive approach, so he'll exist on the battlefield, but there will be other threats on the battlefield that they will be wanting to remove before him. But what if that 3 damage came with a steeper cost? What if we were to give Zoyowa Infect, with the cards Phyresis, Glistening Oil, Tainted Strike, and of course the Grafted Exoskeleton? We can turn some of our burn cards in this deck into lethal poison counters. We can give them to our commander to turn that 3 damage that he can deal into 3 poison counters. We can also give them to cards like Heartless Hidetsugu, who can kill the entire table immediately if he has Infect. Some of my other favorite targets would be the Brash Taunter, who is indestructible, and whenever he's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. You can also pay 3 to have him fight another creature, and so even if an opponent won't attack you for the fear of this thing blocking, you can force their hand. Give him Infect, and that damage will become a lot more dangerous. Hobgoblin Bandit Lord can burn any target equal to the number of goblins who've entered the battlefield this turn. Give him Infect, and that damage will be converted to poison counters. Another use for this is combining it with that Putrid Goblin combo, which at this point I think that combo is pretty central to every one of this deck's strategies. Mayhem Devil is another great target for Infect, as anytime any player sacrifices any permanent, he deals 1 damage to any target. Any card that says it deals damage, that damage can be, in theory, pivoted to being poison counters. Chandra's Ignition can be fun if you get a creature with Infect up to at least 10 power. Something like the Stalactite Stalker can grow larger the more times we've descended, give it Infect, and this will kill each opponent on the spot. Now, since I choose not to use a lot of the standard tutor cards in my lists, I opted instead to use Goblin Engineer and Goblin Welder to help tutor for the Grafted Exoskeleton. The Engineer can help pitch it to the graveyard upon it entering the battlefield. While its second ability cannot recur the exoskeleton, the Goblin Welders certainly can. And you can even use treasure tokens to sacrifice for the Welder's ability, making those treasure tokens especially more useful. Not that they weren't useful to begin with. Building this deck was so much fun. I love Zoyowa, and I love the level of creativity that it allows in deck building. I'm also happy I finally get to cover a Goblin deck on this channel to follow up my Krenko Mob Boss deck. Oh my god, that was 5 years ago. What happened? Anyway, that's gonna wrap up this video for now. I have to go stare at my mirror and question the last 5 years of my life. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, likes and shares will make me feel like I've spent the last 5 years doing something productive with my time. If you're new here, subscribe, I guess, and I'll catch you all next time.